Sounds like a plan.
So, hi everyone, welcome. We're so excited you're here. And so you'll notice that you'll have your cameras on when you came on. And so Nami actually likes to see your faces. And so if you want to go ahead and turn your cameras on to make her feel at home with you being here, I think that would be great. One thing that you can do to help is that if you put your your screen or software system, your Blue Jeans in presenter mode, then you'll see Nami at the prominent, but you'll be able to see everyone. So that would make her feel better inside, I think. And so let's talk a little bit about Nami and what she does. So Dr. Namratha Vedire is the Director of Platform and Operations at Engage Ventures. She leads development of the programming and content that's delivered to their portfolio companies. Nami started her career at a venture creation as a venture creation consultant at the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, where she worked with over 50 student, faculty, and alumni-led early stage startups. And so she's pretty much perfect for what we're doing right now. Nami was the associate director of the Center for Deliberate Innovation at Georgia Tech, where she led strategic planning and operations. Nami ran the Flashpoint at GT program at the center as well, which taught founders, enterprise innovation teams, and leaders how to build their companies right. And so, Nami, before I get into that, I just want to give some little things or housekeeping related to the site that we're using. So today we're using Blue Jeans. And so pretty much we're encouraging you to mute your microphones, which everyone has done. So thank you so much for that. Throughout the conversation that Nami's having, she's going to have breakpoints in there where she's going to actually answer any of your questions. And so, again, she wanted to actually hear directly from you. If you put a me in the chat, then we can call on you to actually ask the questions you want during those break times. We strongly encourage you to use a laptop if you can, because then you get to get the most out of today's presentation. And keep it at camera eye level so that we can actually see your entire face. And so thank you so much. And Nami, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to actually stop sharing right now.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Risha. And thank you all for joining. I still don't see a lot of your faces, so let me, oh, there you go. Like Risha said, I wish we were doing this in person because that meant that I can actually see and interact with you. One of the things I love to do to get some feedback is toss candy, to encourage participation, answers, and all. So unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to do that quite yet on Blue Jeans. So I'm hoping that instead you will take brownie points. And Risha, maybe you can help me keep track of who's asking questions and how much engagement we're getting. And if people want to, at the end, I'm happy to take questions or even schedule one-on-one time for after we wrap up our presentation here today. So thank you again for your time. Like Risha mentioned, I work at Engage, which is a venture capital firm and a program that we run at Georgia Tech in partnership with 11 corporate partners. Everyone ranging from AT&T to UPS is part of our family, and we work with entrepreneurs who are trying to solve problems that these big enterprise clients usually have. So that's the nature of the work that I do. But what we're talking today, pitching and pitching like a pro specifically, came much before I joined Engage or even came to Georgia Tech. This is material and content that I developed when I was working at Yale with startups that were student founded and or with faculty and student combinations, and just helping them think through how do you work with the idea that you have in your head and communicate it so that other people besides you understand it. And so that's what I'm going to try to explain to you today as well. So Risha, I'm going to get started with screen share, and you can tell me, oh, it says screen share is disabled for this meeting. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see? All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, we're still good?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. I can see you in little itty bitty squares. So thumbs up, thumbs down for slow, or if you have questions, put them in the chat. And I know Risha will help me moderate that as well. Again, wanted to remind you that brownie points are getting counted, and at the end, we'll give out some meetings and other things in lieu of chocolates that I usually try to do for events like this. So I'll get started with a little bit about me. Like Risha mentioned, my name is Namratha Vedire, but I go by Nammy because I know it's a mouthful. I was born and brought up in India. I went to school. My undergrad was also in India, and I moved to the States to do my PhD at Yale. And since then, I've been in the US. And I know there are a lot of international students who are having a hard time with meeting families, seeing and just managing life, given everything that's going on now. I just want you to know that I feel your pain. All of my family is also based in India, so I definitely have been doing a lot more of video calls. I wish I could see them in person instead. So that's just a little bit about where I'm from, but who I am as a person. I love eating ice cream. Doesn't matter how cold or how hot it is. I don't need an excuse to eat ice cream or cake, apparently. I love lifting weights. And I don't competitively lift, but that's kind of what I do to decompress at the end of the day. And I love reading books. I start my day with like 30 minutes of reading either fiction or nonfiction as well. So that's a little bit about me and the places that I've worked at and studied at. So IIT Hyderabad is where I did my undergrad, electrical engineer by training. Yale was where I got my PhD again in electrical engineering. And both those places together taught me a lot about engineering. And while I was there, I took a bunch of classes at the School of Art. And so I'm also fairly well versed in design and have started building that as like an additional skill set for myself. And when I was at Flashpoint before and the Center for Deliberate Innovation, I worked with a lot of early stage founders, and there the thinking was, how do you help them understand the psychology behind the startups that we're building, the customers that we're trying to connect to, the products that we're creating. And so I was able to layer on that engineering and design background with this more psychology aspect. And then with Engage, I primarily drive all the operations and build the programming for our startups as well. So I'm beginning to feel like I'm taking on the shape of like a Swiss Army knife, which for anybody out there who's trying to figure out what you want to do with life, what you want to do in your career, that's what I would encourage you to do. Find jobs, opportunities, internships that help you build your skill set, things that you might not already find as your strengths. How do you add on to that, build different aspects and facets of your personality? Works superbly awesome in a startup, where we are in almost every venture fund or accelerator program in the world is a mini startup in itself. So that's a little bit about me, my background, who I am, and specifically about this content that you're going to be seeing today. Like I mentioned, a lot of this I built as a 5-part workshop series that I delivered to students and faculty who were going through the Yale summer fellowship program. And a lot of the sources I want to say, so the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, the Yale School of Art, they kind of helped me shape a lot of the content. Duarte is a firm that does a lot of like design elements for important presentations, pitch decks. If you don't know them, I would also encourage you to check them out. Linda, Ted, and Theos, I'm sure all of you have heard of them. All of these sources have helped shape and give some of the layering of depth directly from experts who've spent their lives studying and understanding what storytelling is all about and how do you tell a story better. So I'm going to refer to those sources wherever we find them. And if you don't already know, at least for Georgia Tech students, and this may be true even for the Georgia State students who are on, lynda.com for sure is something that you should have access to through LinkedIn Learning now. That's what it's called, I believe. So feel free to go poke around there. They do a lot of professional development as well as like skill specific platform courses that I highly recommend that you take. There are also a lot of books in this arena that I would recommend. A lot of that content has gone into creating this deck, but I also love to refer back to my prime sources. So all of these books, especially Joe Navarro, What Everybody is Saying, he's phenomenal at this. He's an FBI agent who has done this in the field, and he's very good at reading and learning body language. So I would recommend that very much too. Before we move forward, does anybody have any questions? Risha, anything in the chat? All right.
Not
Okay.
yet.
All right. We'll keep going then. But feel free to stop me. I'd like for you to interact and ask questions so that I don't feel like I'm doing this by myself in an empty office, which is where I am right now. So I'll tell you, this is like a short story that I like to start all of these sessions with. This is a story, as the title says, about perils faced by at-risk youth, and you know, there's a this is usually how we're used to seeing presentations, whether it's from students, whether it's from our faculty, whether it's from entrepreneurs, and this is not storytelling. This is just you letting your audience read or me reading things at you. And this is not storytelling, this is not pitching. And I like to start here as a base point because it just illustrates all the things that we've been told over and over again, that if you have a big title, if you have an image, if you have bullet points, that makes a slide deck look good. And I have all of those elements, but you can clearly see this is a bad example for how you don't want to design a deck or a presentation or a pitch. And so and if you actually took the time to read through all of these bullets, which I'm sure some of you are doing, you will understand and hopefully guess that at the end of this is actually Wizard of Oz, the story. And the way the words have been phrased that are so jargon-like, that have been taken out of context so much, you completely lose the story in trying to sound smart and trying to follow like these so-called rules that everybody keeps talking about when designing things, especially decks and pitching and storytelling. And that's what I want to show you, all the things not to do in one slide. If you take away anything from this hour that we're going to be spending together, I just sincerely hope that you will remember the slide and say, Nammy told me one thing, to not do anything like this. And that's all I want you to take away from at the end of this hour. And I wish I could inspire in you a love for storytelling and why that's important. And honestly, like, storytelling is important because stories are like these little itty bitty ideas that start off as sparks that are so delicate, that start off in our heads, in the ideas in the heads of people around us. They're so fragile when they start off that they need a lot of like love and nurturing. And if you can manage to capture some of that magic that stories tend to have in that nascent form, you know, your idea could actually become something off the world, that lives in the world, that's independent of you, and that doesn't need that kind of nurturing anymore. And so all of this pitching is all about storytelling. It's about how do you inspire in people the same love for what you have about your idea, and how they could probably see a world where that idea lives and becomes part of that world. And you know, people underestimate the power of storytelling. As human beings, it goes back to our ancestors and to our childhoods, where we've sat around fires and we've sat at dining tables and exchanged stories about who we are, how we live our lives, what's going on. It's how we build a narrative of who we are as people. And so stories are these incredibly powerful things. And think about all of your pitching, whether it is to an investor, whether it's to a customer, whether it is to recruit team members, whether it is to recruit other people, as how do you tell that captivating story for people to join you on your journey? Can you inspire in them the same love for the future with your product, with your idea in the world that you think and you see in yourself? And so that's what I want to inspire you to. And we do this around campfires. We do this in movie theaters where movies are inspiring us for the love of what the world is, that they make us laugh, they make us cry, and your pitch should have the same emotional tone as well as the same arcs and structure that good stories tend to have. And so they have this transformational power that if you harness well, your pitch actually becomes like one of those stories that gets stuck in the back of people's heads that they can't let die. And therefore, you've transferred your idea that's just been yours into other people so that they can carry it along with them. And to kind of orient us with all the different pieces that there are to storytelling, I kind of like to think of creating pitches in four parts. The first one is content. What is the story that you want to tell? Which area are you in? How do you want to think about it? What is the structure? So is there an arc that takes place where your hero is moving from, just learning that, he's Luke Skywalker and then going all the way to the other side of the journey where he knows he needs to face off with Darth Vader? Like, can you see that entire arc? What are the emotional tones that you need to lay on to that? And then there's design, especially with a visual deck or a visual medium like the one that we are engaging on right now. There needs to be design and intention to the content that you place on the screen, the elements that you use to highlight that content. And so there's the aspect of design. And then the last part is delivery. How do you deliver? What is your body language like? What are your tones and vocals? How are you using them intentionally again? And that's the whole purpose of this Pitch Like a Pro presentation. And so again, if you don't remember anything else, at the end of the hour, four things. Every good pitch, every good story has content. So there's a big idea. It has structure. So there's some kind of change in or development of something that happens that moves you through the story. And then there's design, whether it's a visual medium, whether it's a leave behind, whether it is a movie that you're creating. All of those need to have intentional elements that aid your storytelling. And then the delivery, how are you telling it? Is it someone else who's narrating? Is it you who's narrating? All of that matter as well. And so we'll start with content. So the first piece is, how do you even figure out what the different pieces are that need to go into your story? Before I jump any further ahead, I want to pause for questions, either from the chat, if there are any, Risha. Otherwise, if any of you have questions, feel free to just unmute yourself. I'm going to pause for about 20 seconds.
So we don't have any questions in the chat, but let's give it a few seconds to see if anyone would like to unmute themselves to ask. So we have a question from Nicholas. He says, are we going over each of these topics in detail?
I wish we had the time. When I typically give this presentation, I usually do it in 5 one-hour chunks. We do not have that time, so you'll get the Cliff Notes version of it. But good question, Nicholas.
And our second question from Daniel, what are your thoughts on the STAR method?
I don't know the STAR method, so if you want to unmute yourself and tell me what that is, I'd love to learn.
Yeah, so the STAR method is where you talk about the situation, the task, the action, and then the result.
Okay, cool. And so that I would put completely in the content bucket, right? So everything that you just talked about is just another way to think about what is the story that you're trying to tell and what are the aspects of that story that you want to communicate. And so while I don't specifically endorse or know of the STAR method, I think that what you just told me form the basis of the basic content blocks that you need to tell your story better. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
All right, perfect.
Nami, we have no other questions for, showing up in the chat.
All right, okay. So why don't we move ahead and just keep putting those questions, and we'll stop at points so I can talk to you guys a little bit more as well. So getting started with content. Um, I have a question for all of you, and I would really love to see what your answers are if you want to put them into the chat. What do you think is the biggest piece you have to consider when you're trying to figure out what is the story arc or storyline you're trying to tell?
Delivery.
Okay, delivery.
I would
We
say
have,
the
sorry, go
ri-
ahead. Yes, please.
the rising climax. This is Keelan, by the way, from Houston, Texas. Like
Hey,
the
Keelan.
how you doing? Um, but yeah, that's one of the issues. I'm glad you're doing this, by the way. Appreciate you. It's good to see how you are. It's good to see your progress in the big world and the big scheme of things. So I'm very proud of you, by the way. Big ups. But no, the climax. What's the key problem that the hero or the person's going through?
Awesome. Great point. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? I hear you, Keelan, and thank you so much for your appreciation. And it really means a lot to me. Risha, you were saying something else?
In the chat, we have Gazal saying delivery,
Mm-hmm.
Anugit saying audience,
Mm-hmm.
Del agreeing with that and also adding the listener, Sherry
Mm-hmm.
saying delivery, Imogene saying personal experience.
All
Sherry
right,
would like to
perfect.
unmute herself to actually answer as well.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sheree. Hey, Nami. I'm from Savannah, Georgia. I would say delivery because I feel like even if the design is good, the structure is nice, the content is A1, if you don't know how to articulate those thoughts in a way that other people can understand it, I feel like all of that is irrelevant. Like, I
Hmm.
could come up with the best design in the world, but if I can't present that to you, then, what's the point of it?
Very, very good point. I hear you, Shri. And I think that's why we talk about like at least the model that I use in my head so I don't forget a lot of the good points that you, Keelan, and the others have made is content matters, the structure in which you organize that content matters, the design, which is you have to have all of these elements. It's not that one is better than the other or one trumps the other. What makes a perfect pitch is the balance and the showing up of all four of these elements. So I hear you definitely on that. But I did want to go back to one of the answers in the chat. And Risha, correct me if I'm pronouncing their name incorrectly. I think it was Anudit who said audience.
Yes,
Is that
and
correct?
Del
Okay.
as well.
Okay, so both of you, you need to pat yourself on the back because a lot of people forget that storytelling is about who the audience is. Because how you tell Wizard of Oz to a crowd of, you know, 6-year-olds is going to be extremely different from how you present Wizard of Oz on stage on Broadway or on a movie screen. And so people tend to forget that it's not about me, the entrepreneur. It's not about me who I'm talking to. This presentation, even this one that we're sitting in right now, it's all about you. I want to understand what you're thinking. I want to understand who you are as students, where you're coming from. I want this to be relevant to you. And so we tend to forget that we are not the heroes of what we're talking about. I think it was Keelan who was talking about the climax and the hero's journey and the problem. Before you even get there, you have to understand that your audience is who matters because if the audience changes, how they relate to the hero will change. And you have to be able to capture and start with that. So when you're thinking about your content, when you're thinking about your story structure, you have to start with who is it that will care about your message, about your story. So make it all about the audience, point number one. And then um, once you know the audience is, you have to then start plotting the lines to figuring out what the big idea is. What is it that you want them to care about? that should be point number two. And so you can't get to the hero without understanding the fact that the audience is what is the hero. If you think that the hero's journey is about your customer, right now for your audience to thrive and your audience to embrace your idea, they have to be the hero in the story. The arc of the story is them moving through not knowing and not understanding and caring about your product or idea to the other side where they understand and they care and they want to embrace your idea. So that's the story arc that you want to go through, and move them through. So, and people make this mistake all the time. People walk into rooms where they don't know who the audience is, who they would be meeting with. That's where I would start every single time. Who are you going to meet with? What is their interest in showing up to this conversation? What are they expecting? And how do you help them care about what you're doing? It's not about you. You don't show up in that picture, in that thinking at all. It's all about who is receiving and listening. So people who said audience, listener, you guys are on the right track. Kudos to you to start thinking about this already. So audience is always key. And then the way I like to start thinking about all the different pieces of that big idea that I want my audience to care about is by putting tons and tons of sticky notes on a wall. There's no filtering at this point. You just want to get everything that's in your head about your audience, about your idea. Just get everything onto as many stickies as you want, and then just stick them on the wall and look at them. And again, a key here, if you can limit one item, one idea, one thought to a stickies, write them with like big expo markers like these guys so that they actually are visible for you to stand far away enough and look at what it is that you're creating, the content that you're generating. That's what would be amazing for you to start just with, like that brain dump of everything that's living in your head, all the assumptions that you're making about your audience. Start with that. And so there's way more that we can get into content, like how do you start thinking about the audience? How do you segment them? How do you start thinking specifically about reaching that audience? But big points, make it about the audience. Think about how do you make them care about your idea. That's where I would want you to start with when thinking about storytelling when it comes to a pitch. Having said that, next I want to talk about the structure of how do you organize this content? How do you start thinking about what that arc of that journey, the hero's journey, if you want to call it that, would be? And to go back to Keelan's point, you wanted to become like a climax thing. Like how do they see the world with your product, with your idea in it as being the only way out, right? Like that's the ultimate goal of making them care. How do you get them there? But before we go again, I do want to stop for questions.
We have a couple. Let's go. Braxton, go ahead. And then afterwards,
Awesome.
I'll talk about the chat.
Cool. Yeah, I had a quick question of just how do you decide which story to tell? As an entrepreneur, I feel like there are so many different stories that you could go with. You could tell the story of yourself as the entrepreneur and show the founder problem fit, or you could tell the product's story of how it has evolved and pivoted and been successful over time, or the story of a user using your product and it solving their problem, or even the story of the problem itself and how the problem has evolved and how people have tried to solve it in the past. I feel like a lot of times when we walk into a pitch, we only have so much time to tell a story. And my struggle has always been, which one of these stories do I focus on?
So fantastic question, Braxton. I think that the answer to your question is in what we just talked about. And that is the question about who is the audience and what do they care about. So if your audience is customers who you want to recruit and get to use your product, then you want them to understand what other customers have done. If your audience is people you want to recruit onto your team, it might be more inspiring to hear about your journey or the problem or the product journey of how it has evolved and where you want to go in the future. and therefore you're recruiting for that aspect. So yes, you have limited time, which means that it's a forcing function for you to choose exactly who your audience is and what you think you're going to get them to care about the most. So again, I would go back to that same guiding principle. What is the audience? Who is in the audience? How do you think that they will react or care to the stories that you have to tell?
Okay, well, just in case no one has muted themselves, um, the I have a few questions here. Would it look bad if we had many sticky notes? Because I'll ask that question. Oh,
Well, it's not a bad idea to have many sticky notes to start with. You know, you shouldn't filter yourself in step one. You should always have a lot to go with, and then once you start thinking about the story arc, you put in just the stickies that make that story arc make sense, which is going to be the next step that we talk about. So, starting with a lot is never a bad idea. Typically, when I am planning presentations, I usually cover up an entire whiteboard or a whole wall with stickies and then start culling the ideas that I don't think either make sense because of the context and the audience or because of time. So something has to go. And so that's the second step, is doing that filtration, not the first.
awesome. The next question I have is Danielle. You may have already done this with Braxton, but can you give an example of how to make the audience the hero?
Awesome. So, okay, I'll ask you, Daniel, a question back. Do you watch Star Wars?
I know like what it is, but I haven't watched it.
All right. Okay. So bear with me while I use this example then. So um, in Star Wars, people often assume that Luke Skywalker is the hero.
Yeah.
Luke is the young kid that, we have all of those memes about, of like the Force be with you, and the young Jedi who is going to, vanquish the dark side and kill Darth Vader. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so and unfortunately that mistake happens a lot because people think that the person who's leading the whole journey, or the team, is the leader by default. That's actually not true. So people make the mistake of thinking that the entrepreneur is the hero, or the leader of an organization like a CEO is the hero because they're front and center. That's actually not the job. If you talk to great leaders, they will tell you that the heroes of their lives or their journeys are the people they serve. So like customers, for instance, would be heroes for entrepreneurs. So when you talk about figuring out what the hero's journey looks like, the pieces that I would focus on specifically is thinking about who are you trying to serve? Who does your product help the most? How do you elevate their lives? That becomes the story arc for that hero about that audience, right? So, no matter, and to kind of go back to the question that Braxton asked, no matter who you're talking to, you have to talk about like the person or the people or the customers whose lives you're changing. Because ultimately, if they don't put money in your bank account, nobody else is going to put money in your bank account. The best kind of investment money you can ever get is non-dilutive money that's coming because your customers are buying your product. So how do you make them the central hero of your plot? And just flipping back to the analogy I started with, in the Star Wars movies, the hero is always the audience. It's like taking you through that journey of discovering Luke, of seeing him blossom and become a Jedi, and then him controlling the Force, and then him um, vanquishing the Darth Vader, that and the dark side, that whole arc. It's you fighting along with Luke because you're going on that journey with him for the first time. So whatever the
Um,
hero, what go ahead.
no, I said like, no, I got it. Now I got your point because like we are watching, so like kind of we are like acting in the story.
Exactly. It's
Yes.
like Luke is like a stand-in for every one of us who wants to win against the dark side. And
Mm.
so you can use, so anecdotes and stories are amazing if they can pull the person and the audience that you're trying to talk to into that storyline, because then they can think of themselves as the hero that you're trying to make win, right? So how do you find those good characters or those good story arcs that can help people envision themselves in that step, in that space? That's what you want to try and start thinking about. It's like you need stand-ins for, and sometimes it's the entrepreneur. So Dropbox is a great example. The founder of Dropbox, the reason why he created Dropbox was because he kept forgetting files that he needed at work or at home, and he just didn't like having to carry everything around. And so he created the cloud storage where he could put files at work that he needed at home and at home that he needed at work in one place and be able to access it. Now, he can use that to recruit other customers. He can use that to recruit and speak to investors who might want to come on. He might use that same story to bring on teammates who have that shared vision for solving that problem. So it's creating and finding those small anecdotes that can help your audience feel like they're part of the journey that you're trying to map for them.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you.
And Braxton, I hope this answers more of your question as well.
We
It
also
does.
have
Thank you.
okay,
All right,
Braxton, you're
perfect.
saying?
I was just saying thank you.
Awesome. We have a question as well from Juan Carlos. He asks um, a question about flow. If you constantly get interrupted, how is he supposed to tell a story when the audience is constantly deterring you from your story?
So there's a difference between interruption and deterrence. So I want to make sure that I understand what the difference in those two terms are, because, for example, I had a whole story planned for this presentation, right? And none of your questions were part of that story plan. But here we are. And again, I recognize that this is not about me. It's about you and the time that you're spending talking to me through this medium. And so can you use, I'm hoping those interruptions are good in the sense that they're engaging with you. Can you take that as a good sign that they want more from you? Can you use that as your indication to figure out what is it that they might want to answer next, or what you could say next to help answer the questions that you're getting? So again, use those as your guideposts to figure out what in the story you want to add or change or remove, to build better, more complete storylines. Does that make sense, Juan Carlos?
He's having some issues now with
Okay.
audio on his end in
All right.
terms of, so that's why he's using the chat.
No problem. But if you have more questions, like, keep them coming. I'm gonna move on just for the sake of time. And Juan Carlos, like, keep your question up. Like, if you have more to discuss, like, why don't we try to get that at the next break? Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So with that, I want to move to structure. A lot of you already asked amazing questions about structure. And actually, I'm going to jump like a couple of slides ahead here and tell you who you need to look up in order to understand like the structure of great talks. So like I said, we don't have enough time to do 5-hour sessions here. So I'm going to point you to resources that you should absolutely look up. Nancy Duarte is one of them. So remember the Duarte firm that I was telling you at the top of our talk as inspirations and guides that I pulled a lot of this content from. She is phenomenal. So she spent a lot of time mapping talks that have been outstanding talks. So think Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, think Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone. She has mapped all of these talks and in fact has a theory around like what is a structure for your story arc and your storyline that can create a lot of tension, that brings users back into the mix. And so I highly, highly recommend that you look up her TED Talk. Specifically, she talks about this tension between what is and what could be. So you have to contrast a little bit of what the world is without your idea and what it could look like with your idea. And Keelan's point of, what is it the future look like where that product, that climax that you're building toward. And she has a lot of great points that she talks about, both that tension between the what is, what could be, how do you move the hero of your journey, the audience, through that structure with that tension. You give them a little bit of what is, how do things look like now, how do things look like in the future, and with that tension kind of move them through that story arc. So phenomenal speaker herself. I highly recommend that you look her up. And then I did want to start with just helping you think through what kind of different medium we have in terms of relaying our content. So for example, one of our different media we have is you and me talking this way, where I'm presenting to about 40 people at the same time. But we tend to use the same artifacts to do a lot of these things, and it's not always a good idea. So what do I mean? For example, you have a document that looks like a lot of text and maybe a headline. We read research papers, newspapers all the time. That's what people tend to do on their own time, right? Like that, presenting a document to you right now is not a very good use of about 45 to 50 people's collective time. And then think about, the teleprompter version of this, where there's a picture, there's some bulleted points, there's someone standing in front of it, and they're reading out what's written on the slides. Now, I call that teleprompter, even though a lot of people use slides this way, where all of what they're going to say is already on the slides. I call it teleprompter because that's exactly what it is. You're using it to prompt what you have to say, and you're forgetting, again, the audience who is also reading and seeing everything that you have to say. Again, this is a horrible use of about 50 people's collective time. Now, what we can do is use something that is more visual and actually talk about presentations, right? So that's what I want to start helping you think about, is in your pitch, you might need, depending upon the audience, depending upon the situation, a document that is a leave behind, and a presentation that you're actually live standing there and walking a room of either customers, investors, or partners through. And I forget who mentioned the STAR method, but apply the STAR method, the situation and the circumstances, understanding that to your audience and what you've been asked to do, and your content and how you deliver changes based upon that. And I'll make a small separate aside. There will be situations in which you have to have a presentation and then leave that behind for your audience to dig into the details, read more of, learn more of, something that we call a leave behind. I think of them more as like slide docs. So think of these as like your textbooks that have both the detailed version, and then they also have something where it's more visual, where it's more graphic. So as you're thinking about creating your pitch decks, your presentation decks, think about what kinds of different contexts in which you will be using them, and can you use one or more of these different ways to create the content that you want to create for the audience that you're trying to address. So just wanted to say a little bit about that, give you the heads up to look up Nancy and her talk on the structure of great talks. I won't be able to even do any justice to how well she walks you through the hero's journey and how to move through those arcs. So I will leave you guys to do that follow-up after. With that, I want to pause here. We're kind of at halfway point, and ask if there are any more questions.
Okay, while someone is deciding to unmute themselves, I'm just going to read something from the chat itself. Going to make sure I don't miss anything. Someone said, but I think what you mentioned about the great story may answer this. Nicholas had the question of, do you have any example of a pitch that incorporates a hero strategy that we could use, we could view after this? exemplar pitch of Shark Tank. And then we had another question earlier from Christina Leo. She mentioned, Nammy, can you use the Wizard of Oz to illustrate these 4 points?
So one question at a time. So Risha, I want to go back to Nicholas's question. So
Okay,
Nicholas,
perfect.
your question was about
An example of a pitch.
an example pitch that you can use, or you want to see to figure out which one is good.
Yeah, we were discussing about the. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. We were discussing about the hero thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, do you have like an example we can view? I don't know, YouTube or anything like that we could view that to see exactly what you're talking about when you do that.
Yeah, so the talk that I was just talking to you about, Nancy's talk, that one is a great way for you to figure out, like, she talks to you about the hero's journey, how to think about the audience, what is the structure of the talk. She's given plenty of those, and what I can do when I follow up with Risha is in the email that you'll get after the event, we can send you some of those resources as clickable links for you to look at as well. Does that help?
Yep. Thank you.
All right. And then Christina's question was, can we use the Wizard of Oz story as an example for which points?
I think she wanted the examples of the 4 different things that we're talking about as the way to
okay. So
pitch, or
like this part, the 4 different pieces?
The one before. the content, the structure, I think that was from an earlier question.
If Christina is on, can you unmute yourself? I'm confused by your question. I would love some direction.
May not be able to unmute herself.
Okay, so Christina, maybe you can help.
Oh,
yep, I can hear you.
Hey, it's Shannon.
okay.
So I think what she was trying to ask was where you have structured content, design and delivery, if those could be explained in the terms of Wizard of Oz, kind of like how you did the first slide.
I don't think I can illustrate them, but I'm hoping that in the design section, I'll give you a little bit more case study examples that are mock-ups. So maybe that should help solve that issue. And if it doesn't, maybe you can ask me this question again at the end and we can talk about it. Does that sound good? Both Shannon and Christina. I hope that helps.
Yeah. It wasn't my personal question, but I was just kind of about.
No, I totally appreciate the clarification. That makes a lot more sense. And definitely room for improvement for me. So I think that's a good point to see if we can create something that we kind of push and develop over all of these points. Again, like I said, this is not usually an hour-long talk, but we're kind of having to rush through a little bit of that to get to where you guys want to make sure that you have all the different pieces to create a great pitch. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll move on.
That's it from the chat.
All right, okay, why don't we move on and then we'll stop again for more questions. So I want to talk to you about design because that's my personal passion. And I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from having seen and lived through enough horrible PowerPoint presentations that I now believe that I might actually sign myself up to a personal crusade of making sure PowerPoints never look ugly again. And I have this passion for smart people like you, scientists, engineers, creative thinkers, who spend a lot of time crafting and building their ideas that don't spend enough time trying to make sure that you're visually communicating your idea as well. And so this section is a little bit longer than the rest, but we'll kind of move through it super quick. It has a lot of examples to what some of you have been asking for as well. So I'm hoping that this is what this is more of the meat that you get as well. So I'll start with basically when you're thinking about designing a deck specifically, this is more of like an ideology that I tend to call slideology. again, going after Nancy Duarte and the work that their firm has done. There's a book on this if anybody wants to pull that up as well. There are basically 5 parts to thinking about design for decks specifically. First one is like, what is the content? Again, just like we talked about what do you think about when designing a pitch? What is the content? How do you clarify and keep that messaging from that content really, really high? How do you build and use contrast so that you're amplifying the message that you're building? And then using different tactics to compel. So this is that movement of that hero, your audience through that journey, that story arc that you're creating. And then the last is you have to create a consistency of expectations. So you'll already notice through this talk, I've tended to use 2 colors. You kind of expect the same font face from me. What are some of those other ways in which you can create consistency and expectations for the audience so that when you break that consistency, they know it's something to pay attention to? So we'll talk a little bit about those few different aspects. And again, please keep your questions coming. We'll pause in a little bit to ask and check in with you as well. So I'm going to start with content. And there were great questions about like how many stickies, is too many, a lot? Like how do we get everything that we have in our head out? And the place that I typically tend to start is ideas, especially something that you're building into a pitch, tend to be spread out over different forms. Like you might have, existing content like papers that you've written, emails that you've written, slides you might have already created or someone else has shared with you. Can you pull all of that existing content? And then can you build on that existing content by searching the web for other resources that support the story and structure that you're trying to say? So for example, with this presentation that I'm giving to you right now, I know I don't have enough time to share all of the stuff that I would like. So giving that plug to the TED Talk, for example, is me pulling on resources that might be useful for you, but I don't necessarily have time to go into details on. So can you build on that existing content by bringing in supporting material from people, experts, from sources that are really credible to bolster your story even more? And then all of your stickies that you've created, like all the stuff that's in your head, can you start pulling that stuff, all the new content that you think needs to go into your presentation as well together? So 3 sources that you're building on: existing, what is new and supportive, and what is brand new that's in your head that you think is missing and can really help tell the story. So once you have those pieces, then you start ordering the ideas. It's like now you start thinking about what does that story arc look like? How do you, which order do they come from? Like, do you start with the big idea? Sometimes it's appropriate to start with a big idea. We talk to a lot of corporates and corporate executives as part of what we do at Engage. And I know with them, you always lead with the punchline. So you give them the executive summary up front, because if they decide whether they want to listen to you or not in the first 4 or 5 minutes, and then you either get them for the rest of the meeting or you don't. So sometimes it really does help to put that big idea up front, give that executive summary. Sometimes when your pitch is 4 or 5 minutes long, you might not want to lead with that big idea up front, and you want to build that tension, you want to build that story so that you're building up to that climax at the end where you're revealing a product, a launch, right? So there are different, again, contexts in which it's appropriate to do one or the other. So how do you order your ideas for the audience, for the context in which you're talking to them in? So once you have that set up, now you have your content, you have the structure. The next thing is, how do you boost the clarity of the message that you have? So with this, I'll specifically, again, I'm an electrical engineer, so I hope you'll forgive me using some jargon. We talk about signal and noise a lot, right? So where's the signal and what is the noise? So for example, for whatever reason, the noise is not rendering properly, but next to signal, it says noise. So for example, in the signal noise case, you want the signal to be high enough that it drowns out the noise. So in every slide that you design, in every idea that you're putting out there, the content that you're pulling together, can you identify for yourself what is the signal and what is the noise? Because you don't want that to be the result. You want it to be as high signal as possible. So we're going to do some rapid fire examples, and I want you guys to tell me if what you're going to see next in terms of case studies is signal or noise. So if you want to put that in chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself and tell me, I just want to hear very quickly. We're going to move through a few examples now. So tell me whether this slide is signal or noise.
Noise.
Whoever said
Noise.
that, noise. Okay. All right. So the first person who said that, tell me why.
Specifically because, well, connecting to any like point, it just seems like a inspirational quote with a, I don't know, with an animated model next to it. So I don't really get what it's connecting to in terms of a pitch.
Right. Kaylin, now that I see you, I know you, man. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes,
Jeez, it's been a while. It's good to see you.
likewise.
But yes, you're absolutely right. This is noise, because what does Albert Einstein have anything to do with Marilyn Monroe? I get the quote, but it's really not amplifying the message, which is everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So maybe instead of Marilyn Monroe, it was an outline of Albert Einstein that was rendered in a similar way, so that it gives you the amplification of the signal that you already have present on the slide. So how do you tweak those signal noise combinations? That's super important to understand. Here's another one, simple one, signal or noise. Come on, this one's easy. The longer you take, the less stuff we get to talk about.
I see noise in the chat.
Chat.
Noise.
Okay, so yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. This is noise. Like, I can barely see what the buzz candidates are supposed to be about. The background is not doing anything. The colors are not doing anything. There's just so much noise here that you can't even understand what the signal is. So again, how do you tweak that? This is super obvious, but I'm giving you an example again to understand how do you differentiate between signal and noise. How about this one? Signal or noise?
Signal.
Signal.
Yep, absolutely correct. All of you saying signal, you're right? So because if you think about changing the world, this momentous picture that's taken of Dr. King giving the I Have a Dream speech, that's exactly what you want people to associate with when you want them to think about changing the world. So this is very high signal. So can you go through your ideas and start to sift out what part of your idea might be signal, what part of your idea might be noise, and how do you amplify the signal while damping down the noise? That's what you want to do. That's the first part about clarification. The next one that I personally really, really like is one message per slide. If you've noticed the cadence at which we are going through PowerPoint right now, I think we might have done like 40 or 45 slides so far. I don't pay any attention to all of the formulas out there that say you need 1 minute per slide, you need one slide per 5 minutes. None of that stuff matters. It matters what the slide is saying, and is it signal or is it noise, and what is it communicating? So for me, I like to be able to talk to what I'm presenting, and so I specifically recommend having just one thing for people to focus on, no distractions, so that you control where the audience is directing their attention to. So one message per slide. And for those who wanted examples, here's one. So this is kind of like an exaggerated example again, but I like this one because we see a lot of slides that look like this that might not be quite as bad, but they come from entrepreneurs nonetheless. So if you ask people what sets our company apart, and they've given me all these bullet points, so let's just apply some of the lessons that we learned. We do want people to understand what sets the company apart, but so much text is really distracting. This falls kind of in that teleprompter space where people have taken that bullet everything out to the extreme. And so if we apply what we learned about one message per slide, what you could do is just notice that there are 3 items in this slide that really need to be communicated. Can we break them out so that each of them is just one slide by itself? So, what sets our company apart? There are 3 things that set our company apart: global reach, superior technology, and our team. That's just it. So the previous slide becomes this slide, and then you have supporting material to talk about each of them. So now I will tell you what global reach means, what superior technology means, what team means. They don't need to see all the goods up front. And so you can now have the follow-up slides that tell people what each of the pieces are. And then we can walk through some of these examples to see what the design aspects would look like. Everyone still tracking? Can I get some thumbs up? All right, perfect, awesome. So that's like a very simple. Did we have a question?
Nammy,
Yep.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can
Okay,
you tell me your name, please?
Juan Carlos. I was having issues with the, and then I switched to the telephone, so now it's working. Are you fond of using videos? Like if you want to make an intro into a big part of your presentation, put in a quick clip of 15, 30 seconds. Are you in pro or con of using the videos?
You can absolutely do videos. I'm a big fan if they're, again, super focused and not long and rambling. So again, what is the purpose of video when you can talk to it? Or can you send that as something that for people to watch after? Will you have a discussion based on what that video is saying? So again, it needs to have a purpose in that story arc. It needs to be doing something meaningful. It has to have intention. You can't just add it because it's fun to add. Yeah.
No. The reason why I ask is sometimes your startup is about solving a big problem. So the video will be kind of an intro showing what the problem is. Then you show the quick clip, and then you tell, okay, and here we are to solve that issue, what you just saw on the video. Instead of telling a story of whatever the issue is, the video is a boom, 15 seconds gives the picture.
Absolutely. I think using media is always a good plan. If we had more time, we would actually play some of the video clips that I usually do in the longer talks as well. It breaks up something that is this long. But if you have like a minute for people to hear you pitch, I wouldn't use a video because you want them to care about what you are saying and who you are, and that much of quick switching doesn't really help the human brain. So there's a little bit of like that psychology also you have to understand. In a 5-minute pitch, maybe a 30-second clip is okay, but again, do you want them to hear you talking, or do you want them to hear somebody else talking, and what is it that the video is saying, if that makes sense?
It makes sense. And the other thing is, I through time, back in the time when Steve Jobs was making the keynotes, he always used pictures of the products or anything, nothing else, and maybe 1 or 2 titles, but nothing else. Obviously, he didn't have 5 minutes; he could use all the time, and he was the person for coming into an audience.
And that's what I mean by one message per slide. And he knows that the people are there to see Apple products. And honestly, if you have 5 minutes, do you want to see a video while Steve Jobs stares at the screen, or do you want him to tell you what's the exciting stuff that's coming up, right? So there's a little bit of that trade-off. I'm not saying it's the right answer for everybody. You have to figure out what's your voice, what's right for what you're building, but measure that every second that you give voice to somebody else, it's less time that you get to connect with your audience. And that's what you're there for.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. And so I'm going to move ahead, looking at time. I know we don't have too much time, so we'll talk very quickly through this example, and then I'll kind of jump ahead. So let's look at using relationships. So for example, Duarte, again, I have the link in the bottom. They have this diagrammer tool that is available to everybody that gives you kind of like pre-polished designs that their people use. And you can use these relationships to kind of communicate your ideas more clearly. So for example, if we go back to the old case study about what sets our company apart, there are these three things that set our company apart. So instead of showing it like this as a bland bullet point slide, can we instead do something like that, where our competitive advantages are global reach, superior technology, experienced team, and they all feed into each other. So would you prefer that your slides and your visual media looks more like that or more like that? So that's what we are trying to get you, or that's what I'm trying to help you understand, is simplifying the message and then using visuals to communicate that message and talking over it has just as much power sometimes, given the time again, as you producing a super polished video if you have 4 or 5 minutes to talk to an audience. But there are lots of stuff like this. So again, that global reach point that had like a bunch of other bullet points, can you use, again, different kinds of relationships to show how those things stack up? All of these I just pulled directly from the diagrammer link that I showed a little while ago. And again, I'll follow up with Resha to make sure that you have the details of all of these things that we're discussing. So contrast is, again, very key, right? So how can you use contrast to enhance understanding? There are different ways to do it: size, shape, color, proximity. So again, what I said earlier about like when you break things that people expect to see, they tend to notice what is different. And so can you use that to your advantage? So for example, that superior technology item that we were talking about, they're trying to say that their system is 2x faster and doesn't cost anymore. So if you try to do it like that, like the competition is small and then your company is twice as big, and then if you plotted a cost axis, you might be in the same bucket, right? So how can you do all of this visually instead of having to say it using words, is another good example. Another quick plug for design is white space. People feel like they need to use every inch of the slide and the real estate on the slide. As you can see, mine are pretty empty besides the one key slide, that key message that I want you to hear. So it minimizes distraction. Again, this is not everybody's style. I completely understand it. But again, can you minimize the distractions on the slide and then give people a little bit more room to understand what they need to do? The next piece is compel. How do you use data, for example, to compel people and help them understand your message? What about your product is key? There are a few rules on data slides. Pick the right tool. Is it a bar chart or is it a pie chart that you need, or is it a scatter plot that'll tell your story better, or a line graph? Get to the point. Again, use colors, use design to highlight what it is that you want to show. Remove the distractions. Don't just put the chart that Excel spit out. Like, actually make it simple. Remove grid lines that are unnecessary. Highlight what's important so people can very quickly understand. Again, get to the point piece, and tell the truth. People have a tendency to fudge data, and I don't think any of us need a lesson on that, but absolutely make sure your data is communicating perception-wise also what you want your story to say. So very simple examples of like good, very clean figures that don't have too much distraction on them. And here's an example. There's the option A on the right side that talks about 76% preferring dogs, and then there's the pet preferences bar graph, right? Depending upon the context, you want to pick one over the other. If you are trying to talk only about dogs and your product is about dogs, then you should talk just with the slide on the left. But if you want to talk about dog choices in terms of pet preferences versus all the other kinds of pet, then you want to show what's on the right side. So again, the right tool for the right job. There are multiple ways to do it. Again, what's the story that you're trying to tell? And I'm going to talk very quickly about like, how do you make sure you're being consistent? One thing that you might not notice is this entire presentation is actually built on a grid. So all of the elements sort of line up exactly where I want them to. That makes it consistent. So your eyes know where to expect words to fall, figures to fall, images to fall. It's really, I would highly recommend that you build out a grid system that works for the deck that you're building. Keep the margins the same, keep footers, headers, all of them looking the same. So that's one way to build consistency. Color scheme, you've seen that this entire deck is predominantly black, blue, and yellow. How can you build that color scheme in for yourself, whatever your brand colors are? Same thing with font and then size. Same consistency metrics that you've seen throughout this entire deck. So that brings me to a very rapid close of the design piece. And I'm looking at the clock and we have 2 minutes left. So Risha, I'm going to leave this to you to either say we end here or we stay on for 2 more minutes to close out the delivery piece. I will leave that to you.
Let me check. Jennifer, are you on the call at the moment? Jennifer from Georgia State?
I am.
Okay, so what's your preference? I know we wanted to talk a little bit about our organizations, or do you want us to finish out?
No, I would rather spend the last 2 minutes with Nammy, and this has been a fascinating presentation, and there's been lots of good questions, and so I just want to say thank you to Risha and to Nammy and Engage Ventures for. It's a great partnership to be able to hold these events for both Georgia Tech and Georgia State students. So very thrilled to be partnering as the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute at Georgia State.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Thank you so much
Nammy,
for the
take it
opportunity.
away.
All right. Okay. So we're going to close. And for anybody who wants to stay on after, I do have a few more minutes, so we can stay on till about 12:10 or 12:15 for those who have questions. So I'm going to power through this part. So delivery is the last portion of the four-parter: content, structure, design, delivery. And I'm going to start this with what I've been saying a little bit as an undertone throughout this talk, which is authenticity is really important. You want to be yourself always. So what is your voice? What is your style? What is your company's preferred way or your idea's preferred way of being communicated? You have to be yourself. Otherwise, everybody will see through it. So again, big shout out, big fan of being who you are always. Body language matters. Well, maybe not as much in this medium, but still, like, how do I use my hands so that I'm communicating what is important and I'm emphasizing what's important, right? So if you can be a little bit more intentional and practice where those emphasis points need to be, how do you gesture to a large room? All of that really matters. Amplifying those big gestures matters. And again, because we don't have time to go into this, I did want to give another shout out, another reference. If you guys have time, I definitely recommend checking out this TED Talk given by Professor Amy Cuddy on power posing. So big on body language. She studies body language. So that would be a great resource for all of you to check as well. The next one is vocals. So it really, really matters how you project your voice, how you talk, the tone, the timbre, silence. All of it matters. And can you make that intentional part of that presentation that you give in your pitch? Again, because we don't have enough time to go into the details on this, I do want to point you to another TED Talk. This is by Julian Treasure, and he talks about the vocal toolbox and all the things that can be within that toolbox. So I just want you to point again in that direction. He's the master of mastering pitch, tone, treble, silence. There's a ton more he goes into. He actually has 10 tools. I highly, highly recommend that. And so with that, we come to the close of this How to Pitch Like a Pro. I know this might not be quite the traditional pitching formulaic talk you might have been expecting, but my job is not to tell you how to tell your story, but I think, is to help you ask questions about and think about all the tools you should consider while you're telling your story. And with that, I just want to say thank you for your time. And I will stay over for questions if anybody has them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I do have one question for you. concerning the design and sticking to one message per slide, I'm honestly a big fan of that. But sometimes I have issues when you're uploading a pitch deck that has to be 10 slides for a competition or, for an accelerator, etc., or, for an investor. And so most times I get away with it just by maybe putting 2 or 3 messages per slide. But I would love to hear what have you seen from good decks that manage both.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to say that people who put those kinds of limitations are doing it to force compliance so that they don't have to look and read through long decks that don't necessarily do one message a slide.
Mm-hmm.
And those are unfortunate situations. I think the best guidance I would give is communicate your story. And if you only have 10 slides, then tell me the 10 things that I need to know on those 10 slides, and leave the rest for either a follow-up or like an additional, like a link that they can click onto and get that stuff from. So that's what I would recommend as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I know I hate people who put artificial limits on it. It doesn't speak very highly of your ability to fit within that constraint. It's an artificial constraint we don't need.
Thank you.
Del, if you're speaking, I can't hear you because you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, you're correct. I
Okay.
need to unmute the mic. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I think your delivery was excellent. I think your interaction and really trying to give us a lot of opportunities to ask those questions is very important in this world that we're now in, where everything has to be virtual. My question is, I'm a co-founder of a startup, and we're still in pre-seed, but we have raised significant funds. One thing that I try and talk to my co-founder about is having actually different decks that are tailored for each individual audience, whereas one investor might be more interested in our ROI and our business model, whereas others have a slightly different focus. So we've been able to kind of create individualized, personalized decks. What's your thoughts or feeling about that?
Absolutely. You should tailor it to the audience. It's just like writing a cover letter or writing your resume. You should tailor it for the job description. This is no different. I am so glad you're already doing that. And for everybody else who's on the call, if you can do more of it, I would highly recommend it for sure.
Thank you.
Risha, do we have more questions in chat, or what do you?
We don't have any more questions at the moment. I just want to,
Perfect.
while I'm looking at the chat to see if anyone else wants to unmute themselves and ask you any question, we just want to thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for all you do to support innovation and entrepreneurship across Georgia. And so we're so happy that you were able to make this wonderful presentation for us. I am not sure if Jennifer is still on the call, but I'm going to just put this slide deck up. So Jennifer, are you still here? She may have stepped off, but
Yeah, I think she left.
Okay, awesome. So if you're a Georgia State student, we encourage you to check out the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute that Dr. Jennifer Scherer actually manages. She's the director of that program, and they have a ton of events and activities that you can be a part of. And if you're a Georgia Tech student, then we encourage you to jump on over to our innovation website, innovation.galtech.edu, and you'll find out a bunch of different events and activities that we have coming up, including different partnerships that we have going on with Engage Ventures for fall semester, and we're also partnering with Georgia State on these. And Joel Fox will be having a presentation in October about just business finances and all things you need to know about that. Nammy can speak to more about that if she wants to. And then in November, we have Holly. She's also from Engage Ventures, and she'll be talking about marketing, which is super important for entrepreneurs to know and love. So just look out for those events. We want you there as well. Nammy, anything?
Oh no, I'm very appreciative for all your time and effort. Thank you very much. I know my colleagues Joelle and Holly are also on the call, and I'm looking forward to being part of their talks. They're phenomenal people with more experience working with startups than I probably do. So I'm definitely excited for what's coming in October and November too.
Perfect. And Gianna, you mentioned where can we find event information? So if you're at either of those or institutions, Georgia Tech or Georgia State, we'll have that available on our different websites. If you're neither, then that information will be on LinkedIn for you to join. And what we promise to do is when we send the email out, we're going to ask you for feedback on this event. We're also going to be adding the link to the YouTube in terms of you can rewatch this, and if you miss any parts, you can go back to that. And Nammy has graciously volunteered to share her slides as well. And so part of that, we'll send the registration information for the other two events as well that you can sign up for when you get a chance. So yeah, so that's how you can find out a little bit more about the different events we're having with our partnership with Engage Ventures and Georgia State and Georgia Tech.
Thank you.
No problem. I think that is it.
All right,
Okay,
if
and it
that's
was
it,
just saying
then
thank you.
yep, we'll wrap here.
Perfect. And so again, see you around in the virtual world for all of our attendees. We thank you again, Nammy, for being here and just all your valuable information. Thank you everyone for staying until 12:08 to hang with us to talk a little bit more. And we will see you around in the virtual world. Thank you again.